To begin our project, I'll navigate to an open source file sharing site. For this project, I'm using the Prusa printers community site. It has a pretty extensive library of prints that people have uploaded. You can also use Thingiverse and various other free open source sites. The Prusa printer site is prusaprinters.org. And I scrolled through the library for a bit and I found this model of pickle. I'm going to go ahead and download the body. Let's select download. And it looks like the creator of this model uses different files for each of the elements on pickle, the eyes and the scales. For this project, I'm just going to select the body. So I'll download the body. And now we can navigate to Fusion 360. So now that I have Fusion 360 open, I'll start by making sure I'm on the right team and saving my file in the appropriate folder. So I'm using this CSI Makerspace team. I'll select the home icon, go into the collaborative making project, my folder, and save. And this will be Prickle Mod. So now I will import the downloaded STL file. So in Fusion, they call it a mesh file. Select the body part. And I will use, you can move this around if you like, but I'm going to use the default settings. And the default settings put my coordinate system, the Y plane bisects the model, which might be handy later. So I'm going to minimize my data panel. And in order to activate or use the mesh space, I'm going to need to right click on our Prickle Mod top parts drop down and select Do Not Capture Design History. It'll give us a warning and it will make available the mesh work area. So now we'll come over to mesh and looking at the model, and since I did not bring in the tail, their scales and eye sockets, I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these areas. So to do that, we'll use this erase and fill tool, or I can do the drop down, select erase and fill. And we're going to go ahead and use this select and mesh palette. And in here, we want to use this select back faces. It will allow us to grab regions a little more easily. We also want to use the freeform selection tool. So I come to this selection tab, come down freeform, and you can see we have this giant kind of circular region that is the effectivity region. If I just do a single click, it grabs that region. If you notice, it's kind of large and it also grabbed the eye sockets. And what it's doing is it's deleting away that structure and then patching it. And that's not going to be ideal. So we do get a little bit of a preview there. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect that. And the other option of selection is to use the this lasso tool. I'm going to left click and hold down, and I'm going to start to drag a window just around the region that I'm trying to remove and patch. If you notice the pixelations are much larger in this area, we can increase this to make it more similar to the surrounding areas, or we can leave it alone. I also want to scroll around and see if it's keeping it within a decent looking area. So if we want it to protrude out, we can increase the weight. It gives them a little bit of a mohawk type thing, or we can just go back to the default of 1. I'm going to go with the default, hit OK. And because I had how you have this back face selections, it also modified the lower faces, which in this case didn't really hurt anything, but it makes it tricky to select the appropriate faces if we don't have this select back face. So I'm going to repeat this again by right-clicking, repeat fill, and I will left-click down and drag around till I have this region, and OK. Scroll around to see if anything else was adversely affected. If we want to, if we want to undo, you can do Control Z on the keyboard. And the last region that I want to modify is down here. So I'll left-click, lasso around, let go. And this time, I did not select the erase and fill tool. So I'll go ahead and select it now. Kind of look at the preview, and OK. So now our model has been patched. What I'd like to do now is reduce the pixelation so it's a low poly model. We're going to lose a lot of this detail. And before I do that though, I'm going to go ahead and bring down this bodies tab, select my mesh body, do Control C, Control V. This way, make a copy. If I don't like the modifications I do, I can always go back and use this model. I also plan on leaving the eye sockets alone. I think they're fine the way they are. So I'm going to go ahead and close that palette. And I'll start reducing the pixelation by first remeshing. And I will select the body. And we're going to reduce the density all the way, and we're going to reduce the shape preservation all the way. We're going to make sure this preserve boundaries is selected. And we'll look at a preview. You can see it reduced the amount of surfaces quite a bit, but we also start to lose some detail. We'll say OK. And the next tool I will use is reduce. So I'm going to use the space count reduction. I'll select the body, and I will use the default and do it a couple of times till it reduces it to kind of to my satisfaction. So you can see it's starting to get a little more pixelated. I'll say OK, and I'm going to do it again. Select my body, preview it. Just drop the face count down to 700, quite a bit more pixelated. And I think I'm going to try one more time. If I go too far, I can always Control Z to go back. Select my body, do a preview. And that one is starting to lose kind of all sense of shape. So I'm gonna cancel that. And I'm gonna stick with this version. It's a good point to save, so I'm gonna go ahead and save. So now we'll go ahead and create a pedestal for this to sit on. So we'll go to the solid workspace. And in here we can work with history, capture design history or not. I'm going to continue working without capture design history. And we'll start by creating a sketch on the front plane. We want it to be, this pedestal is going to sit below the our salamander here. And I'll do C on the keyboard for circle. select anywhere outside of our part. And the center point here, if I grab that, I can drag it to where it's a little above the tail, and I'll keep dragging it down until I don't want it to be too much bigger. I'm just kind of eyeballing this and go a little bit smaller. And I'm just grabbing it and dragging it around a little bit. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'm going to finish sketch. Now E on the keyboard will extrude, and it automatically selects the sketch we just created. And we're going to drag this down, this arrow, and we just want it to kind of eyeball the proportion from the salamander to the pedestal. You can see that this extrude down is 20 inches, so the current model we're working in is really huge. And we'll leave it at this size until the very end, and then we'll scale it down to a reasonable size before we print. So now I'm going to create some text and emboss it onto this pedestal here. And before I emboss, I need to create a sketch, and I'm going to be on this bottom plane. Come up to create, select text, and I'm going to select down here so I don't snap to anything. In the text box, I'll put in the text I want to put onto the pedestal. CSI, maker space. And the extrude we had done was 20 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and make the height of our text about 19. It looks like it needs to be flipped around, so we use this flip tool until we get it where we want. We can modify the font, we can make it bold, so on. So I'm just going to go with the standard. Now if I grab it, I can drag it around, and I'm going to place it kind of centrally onto the pedestal and finish sketch. Come back up to create, emboss. It's asking for profiles first, sketch profiles. So I select the text. Then it wants a face to emboss to. I'm going to select the pedestal. And the effect tab here, you can either project the emboss out, or you can project it inward. And we can use these arrows to drag the depth, or we can input a value in here. So I'm going to actually come back to the effect coming out, and I want to drag the arrow. It doesn't like that. I think it's too big, so we'll just type in a value in between there of, say, 2. See how that looks. That looks pretty good. Yeah, so when I was dragging this, it altered where it was on the pedestal. So I went back and put that at 0 and just manipulated the depth tab. So I'm gonna say okay. And the last thing I'm going to do here is put a little bit of I'm going to kill this edge using the chamfer tool. So I'll put a chamfer on this edge and on this edge, and we'll just use the arrow. And because it's such a big model, it moves slowly for me. So I'm going to, instead of using the arrow, again, I'm just going to type in a value. And that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to stick with that. So I just typed in a 1 value. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is fuse this pedestal to to our salamander. So before I do that, I'm going to save. And since we never turned on the capture history, we can just go back into the mesh workspace. We'll use this create, and we're going to convert the B rep, which is the body we just created, to a mesh. And we can either select it here or select it in our drop-down tree. And we're not too concerned about this being pixelated like the top body, so I'll just select the default. You can take a look at it. Looks pretty good. So now what we want to do is fuse these two. So we'll select the modified drop-down and merge bodies. And I will select these two. Say OK. Now at this point, if we had decided that instead of the pixelated body, that the kind of original body was better, we would have fused those two elements together. But I'm gonna stick with the pixelated body. I'm gonna hide this warning sign here. Again, this is a good place to save, so I'll save. And now we're ready to send this out to our 3D print. So I'll navigate up to the tools and this make tab. We're not going to output it to a machine directly. So I'll deselect that, and then I need to select the mesh body. Say OK. And I'm going to save this as Brickle on a stand. And now we're ready to print.